All right, welcome everybody. There's the poll results. So we have some family or friends of a service recipient, state staff are leading in FMS entities not far behind. Awesome. Thanks for joining everyone today to this webinar titled Don't Call It Training, Information and Assistance for the DCW. And as we prepared this webinar, Andrea and I, we learned very quickly how hard it is to not use the word training. So we'll see how we do during this webinar as well. So I'm Heidi Davis. I'm a licensed clinician living in the state of Montana, and I worked for, 35 years in home and community-based services, both in behavioral health and long-term care services with agencies and and with self-direction with a few FMS entities. And this picture of me on the screen is I decided to make a bit of a change back last February in launching on my own into some consulting and private practice. So this is a picture of me in New Zealand where I was bumming around as cheaply as I could. And I'm at the base of a glacier here. And I say it was my time to let go of the old and make room for the new. So super excited to be with you today as part of the new.
Thanks, Heidi. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. Andrea Peterson. I founded Petra Policy Advisors as an independent consultant. I've got about 25 years of experience working with state Medicaid and home and community-based services programs, looking at policy and rate development and program design. I met Heidi while we were both working at public partnerships, so we both have some FMS background as well. And so we're really excited to talk to you today about don't call it training, but there will definitely be training involved. But let's go over our objectives next. So
I'd like to interrupt, Andrea, but I don't think your slides are up. I can't see them. I don't know if anyone else can.
Oh, thanks.
I can. That's weird.
Okay, maybe it's just me. Go ahead.
Can other folks see the? I don't know if someone can put in the chat if they can see the slides. That'd be awesome. You can see the objectives. Thanks, Jonathan. All right, so we want to review these objectives, and then we were interested in having a poll to see if you all want to share what you're most interested in, and we can make sure that we are addressing all the different issues. But so we want to first help you understand the importance of engaging the employer to provide direct care worker training. We want to help you improve your understanding of the CMS service information and assistance, help you identify differences between eligibility and contractual requirements in the FMS models, and then relate concepts for constructing employer education support. And so I wanted to note, before we move on, when we talk about direct care worker or DCW, that's the term we're going to use. Obviously this is interchangeable with other common terms like DSP and any other variation that your state might have. And we do include in this definition both paid and unpaid caregivers. That's inclusive of family and friends and neighbors. And so we also want to mention that when we're talking about the employer, the participant is an employer, we want to emphasize that control and choice that self-direction offers those individuals as employers and how they can effectively direct their care. And so if we have the poll, we would like to know what folks think about these objectives, which one you're most interested in. And Charlotte, when you feel like you have enough responses, we can see the results. I will keep moving though.
Will do.
All right, I've moved to the next slide. Hopefully everyone can see that. So there's an identified need for education And so we want to highlight these findings that are actually from an ASD report, how to improve self-direction programs, that is part of a work group relating with FMS and ASDs. So these were items that, we thought were relevant for this discussion. One of them being, robust education materials for program participants, so that they understand their role and what's available to them as they're beginning their journey on self-direction or continuing that journey, and ensuring that those materials are offered in multiple languages. And then also at the same time, robust education materials for workers and providers to understand their role. I think, key to self-direction is, making sure that there's that understanding of who's responsible for what, who to go to for questions, how to access resources, and then, benefits is a big part of, the workers' experience. And then just education and training for the participant and employees before FMS enrollment. So this is something, when you're thinking about taking the journey down self-direction, really understanding what are you getting into, what's involved in your FMS process as well. Heidi and I have that experience working at prior work at FMS. And so kind of understanding some of those barriers that happen when you're first signing up to either be a worker or be an employer. Those are some challenges there. So, one of the criticisms of self-direction too is just that lack of caregiver education. And so we really want to try to address that on today's discussion. We thought this was interesting too. We wanted to share that, while adequate pay is vital for financial stability and acknowledging the value of work for workers, there is other areas that are more qualitative that are important, like education and training. We see these as essential for the caregiver job and their satisfaction and the quality of care that they're able to provide. And so one of the interesting things, this Relias survey from 2025 asked direct support professionals, DCWs, some various questions about their experience. And so that survey found that 25% of DCWs reported being somewhat or not at all prepared following onboarding training. And that 61% of DCWs who reported feeling extremely prepared following their onboarding training were also completely satisfied working for their employer. And I think this is important just to acknowledge that there's that value of feeling like you're prepared and that you are able to provide quality care for that person. And it, should really tie back to longevity in that position. And so if you see in the brown square, when asked what would increase your confidence in your DCW skills, the top two, 39% more continuing education opportunities and 33% wider variety of training options. So those are some things that we'll be touching on today. And we just wanted to relate that this is evidenced by some surveys of actual direct care workers. All right. So to make sure that we also set the stage here and everyone's on the same page in terms of when we talk about our title of our training, what that information and assistance is important for DCWs. We just wanted to step back and define information and assistance for everyone. And so what this is it is a service or function that assists a participant to arrange, direct, and manage their services as the employer. And this is identified as part of the HCBS waivers, also known as the 1915C waiver. And you'll see this defined within the technical guidance for the waiver, and really making sure that this role is established for self-directing participants. And so the way that this is really brought about is through this support broker role. And so this is somebody dedicated. This is a person who is working with self-direction, and they're dedicated to prepare the participant to take on the role of the employer. And so this is really important to set them up for success. When we think about that role too, this could be a role that is specifically defined as support broker, or the tasks around the support broker, or what is required of the support broker, could be performed by a targeted case manager or a care coordinator at the MCO. So it doesn't have to be a separate individual role established, but the requirements of the support broker and to provide the INA does need to be addressed by someone. And then ultimately, just that INA will empower the participant to successfully train their workers. And that's what we're trying to call out here, is that as the employer, as the participant is prepared, they're able to then transfer that preparation off to their worker as well. And so, as I mentioned, this is part of the 1915C. You will also see in other ways that you can provide self-direction with your state through 1915I, K, or J state plan programs. They offer self-direction there as well. And so you have also expectations for this type of support broker support in all aspects of self-direction. And so, for example, in Minnesota, they have a 1915 I and K where they are providing consultation services to those individuals who are self-directing. And so when we're talking about this INA, we are talking about it, beyond 1915C, but also into other avenues of self-direction. And so we also just wanted to call out some best practices. So when you're defining that support broker role, it's really important to differentiate it from the role of case managers and care coordinators, especially if they are also providing the support broker role. It's important to know, when are you a case manager, when you're a support broker, and that you actually are fulfilling all of the needed requirements of that support broker role. And then another best practice that we've seen firsthand is that the support broker role, either employed by or contracted by the FMS, is as a way to facilitate clear pathways of communication. So oftentimes, if it's a budget authority, the support broker is helping with that spending plan. And that's really helpful to be able to have that as part of that clear communication with the FMS for that reason. All right, so I wanted to just, give this high level. We are planning to share the slides, so I'm not going to go into detail about the scope of INA, but there's an information side and an assistance side to it. And this table just shows you sort of what those specifics are. The top 2 rows are about information. The bottom 3 are related to assistance. And I think, just key for this discussion today is this last bullet with, if you can see that, it says the importance of providing practical skills training for the employer, but then also within that training, how to train their workers. And so when we think about how to train their workers, we're going to talk more about what does that look like in the next few slides. And then before I hand it off to Heidi, I just want to touch on just this parallel guidance from CMS related to the 1915K, just showing that, there is a counseling and a training component that is required as part of those types of programs and policies. And Oregon has a STEPS program that is part of their CFC, which is their Community First Choice, which is also the 1915K. And that is a training program that's optional for participants, but it does help them set themselves up in that working relationship and as the employer. So I'm going to pass it off to Heidi.
Okay, thanks, Andrea. So here's where we get into some more of the meat. Just a second, my computer just said it's going to do an update, which I'm not going to let it do. So don't call it training. So want to hear, we're all aware, most of us are aware of the term joint employer, and certainly that's a piece of why we want to be careful in the self-directed realm of calling it training, especially not wanting training to be offered directly from an FMS from a state, unless of course it's in regulation, et cetera. So joint employer specifically, so again, we're on the same page. That means that two entities sharing or co-determining the employee's essential terms and conditions of employment. And we know those conditions to be wages, benefits, compensation, scheduling, and then assignment of duties to be worked. So ASD actually, gosh, my time frame is blurred, but really took the bull by the horns when joint employer information was first coming out years ago, over 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I think, to help us all, FMSs and state entities, be careful of the joint employer ruling, because it also then means that if we are doing any of those tasks, we can be on the, on the hook for like overtime payments and driving and other kinds of things. So here there's just some direct information for you on specifics to where the boundaries are between that. Boundaries, of course, we encourage them to be super clear between the employer responsibility and the FMS or state responsibility. So I think that gets to that one. And then overall with the role of the employer, we know that to be, and this is where it's important to keep that role and boundaries clear, as we just talked about. That in the self-directed models, of which there are two, the employer authority, which often is budget, I refer to that there as budget authority, and then the co-employer or agency with choice model, that it's the employer to ensure that the caregiver is eligible for hire, and that usually is defined into state regulation. And then it is the employer to maintain the training for their DCW, any licenses or certifications if they are, also working with contracted staff. And it is always the employer to train to their specific needs. So in the ACW model, I'm using an acronym, but agency with choice model, you do have the agency employer of record, that may be an agency that just is also monitoring that the employee DCW is eligible, and they continue to work only if specific trainings, if they are identified, are maintained. And the FMS will also provide tools for that for the employer of record, just to make sure that the employee DCW is maintaining their required trainings, et cetera. So the next slide gives a little overview of overall just eligibility and training, of which 0%, unless that poll changed, said you wanted information, like you get this. So I'll be brief here, but eligibility is just, that's the prerequisite. What criteria are in place, and usually that is in state regulations for you to be a DCW. And then training is just the ongoing acquiring of skills and knowledge to continue to perform in that position. So an example of eligibility might be you have to be 18 years old. You might need first aid and CPR training before you get in the door, TB tests, blood tests. And then examples of contractually required training includes things like Medicaid fraud, waste and abuse, abuse, neglect, maybe timekeeping is on there, etc. Okay. And then the next, as we keep moving through, there's what we identified, Andrea and I, as we look more specifically to what type of information and assistance can be provided under for this DCW is there's two types. Overall would be the core skills that can be offered and that the employer may have access to make decisions about what what they think would be good for their DCW. And this slide points that out. So again, the employer could have access to a wide range of different topics that will increase the DCW's knowledge. And this includes things like maybe diabetes or COPD or specific information on dementia, or a good one to prevent injury for that DCW is overall, yeah, lifting and moving or fall prevention. So again, the employer as a potential FMS or as a state entity, uh, again, is just making information around these different topics available to these DCW workers. They choose, again, they choose what the employer chooses, what they want their information, their DCW to have knowledge about. And then here's just a side note that there are specific states that do offer, it's a requirement. So a lot of times I would put this in the eligibility bucket that a DCW needs to complete core competency training. And one state example, and this isn't an exhaustive list, it's just some examples. One such is in Oregon, offered through a certification process where the DCW there, it's called a PSW, takes training and completes training to be eligible PSW or DCW. And now what's come in, which is a really cool thing, into Oregon too, through SEIU Carewell, is just assistance to that PSW and overall onboarding, so that the PSW is receiving more support and then assistance with just navigation of the program. Another example of a training is in Arizona, where we call it Access, developed a training curriculum that the DCW needs to complete. Now it's stated that that DCW can start work, but the training, so this is almost like conditional employment. Which is nice for folks when it can be offered, but they then have 90 days to complete that training. And that's through more of a co-employer agency with choice model to the Arizona system. And then you have states like Minnesota and then in New Jersey, where there can be more purchased access to DCW curriculums. And then, of course, the National Alliance for Direct Support Professionals offers a extensive curriculum with e-badges for specific self-direction learning itself. So that just gives some examples of, again, these curriculums exist uh, in specific states, not all states. Um, so they're having a different approach to overall how do we offer information and assistance to the DCW position.
And we're having a poll now. We'd like to get folks to respond to before we move to the next slide. And so I guess the poll is, what training topic did one study find DCWs most prefer for additional training? It looks like 80% are saying managing challenging behaviors and 20% abuse and neglect reporting. So let's see.
So for the next slide, you guys got it right. So very interesting. And with this poll, and you can see the source of this poll done in Arizona, and they polled 4,000 caregivers. They did say like the overall managing challenging behaviors was number one for them. This is not an exhaustive list. They had like 20 topics. But here we just are giving you the overall top ones that they came back saying that those are important for them. And we also know through just similar data and research, and this is one of my interests because I've worked in the field of behavioral health my whole career, and really I'm a believer in integrated care, which is combining long-term care and behavioral health, and have written some modules around that just to help caregivers just better understand and identify those challenging behaviors and specific behavioral health issues, and then giving ideas to caregivers on what they can do to support people in the home environment. But yeah, super interesting. And again, you guys, yeah, you got it. So next slide, and I think it's back to you, Andrea.
Yeah. So we just wanted to review this consumer direct education. And so another glimpse at the Relias survey from 2025, looking at DCWs. So 63% of DCWs reported receiving appreciation from the people they support is very or extremely important. And so this is interesting in that it's important to make sure that as you're thinking about the trainings that are necessary for the employer, there are more soft skills too. How can participants as employers have effective communication, and how do they build relationships, and how do they manage their workers? So I think this just underscores the need to think about trainings like that as well. And then on the side here, we have a list of education topics. And so when you're thinking about what's helpful for the participant, many of the same trainings would be also helpful for their worker. And so what we have here is just sort of a sample list of what those training topics might be. Obviously, introduction to self-direction is important, roles and responsibilities, working in challenging situations sort of ties back to the survey we just talked about. And I think that, from our experience, we understand that plain language approaches to educating on these topics is very important. And we've had experience writing to those, so many of these topics, and, how to prepare that content to be relatable and in that plain language approach. We have some samples of that prepared as well. So these are just areas where we wanted to give some examples and make sure that there's an understanding of what is it that's needed on both sides for the employer as well as the DCW to have that successful relationship and self-direction. And then just to get at a few common education and training modalities, we believe that it's best practice to offer a mix of modalities just to address different learning styles. Most training and education modalities are typically accessible electronically so that individuals can do things at their own pace and they can take on that training when it's convenient for them. It's also beneficial to consider printed handouts or anything that might be accessible on the job. So if they need sort of a reference sheet or something, sometimes those are helpful as well. And so when you think about, there's online learning modules, there's topical articles, there could be instructional videos, there's practical or experiential learning. And with this one, I think about how it's, convenient for an employer as the participant who is trying to maybe train their DCW about how they would like specific tasks performed, like meal preparations. This would be sort of an example of a practical or experiential learning. And then there may be blogs and support groups, and then handbooks are very common as well, just to provide that kind of reference material. And then again, we'd like to take a quick poll before we continue. We're interested to know what training and education modalities you prefer, or when I say prefer, what have you found to be effective, or your preferred way to receive training. So we'll just pause there while folks respond. It looks like online learning modules are preferred with instructional videos and practical experiential learning as second and third. So thank you for participating. That's really helpful.
Okay. Now we've given you a lot of information from overall to the importance of information and support to the caregiver, potentially how to offer that through information and assistance, or expanding the role of case managers, service coordinators, other individuals that work to support both the employer and then the employer with their employee, and then the two, what we see in the world of self-direction as giving employers access to overall the just different core skills, as well as then self-directed topics, because roles and responsibilities, as we all know, are different in the self-directed models. So hoping here as we build a house together, that we're considering all of the things that we have, all of the information that we've just talked about, to overall establish an INA blueprint. And this also comes from knowing too directly from the DCWs that they do view the information and support that they receive as essential to feeling competent in the workplace, and also retention. So first step then is to establish a INA blueprint. So defining for you whether you're a state entity, an FMS, working with a state entity, to just overall define a strategy to include the role of the employer in training their employee. And that may mean, number two, that you have to go to overall go to your contracts, which is looking at what is the contract that exists. And firstly, we might want to back that up to overall what is in regulation for the overall support, information and assistance or support outlined and given to the employer by the state or the FMS, and then through the employer to that DCW, what's in regulation as well, and then look for opportunities where that may be expanded to include more expectations for either the FMS, the MCO, the employer themselves, and monitoring of that, to how to make topics more available for them to access, the employer to access, and both in the core skills and in then the specific self-directed knowledge realm. Again, that the employer can access to better support their DCW. Another place is to just overall review the floor plan. Notice how all these go to building the house. Andrea was clever with that. So floor plan is the just evaluating the orientation process that is offered to that employer. And then is it there that we could fit some specifics and outline expectations for that employer to bring to overall the orientation of their employee directly, their DCW. That's another place. So the orientation floor plan. Surveying the landscape is number 4. So that's gathering insights first, like gathering insights before you need them about what is important to employers and then the DCW to support brokers. Data collection is key. And both Andrea and I have been involved in helping states with these different portions, and it's very interesting to look at what did occur for surveying so that we know what's most important for that employer, for that DCW. Is it benefits? Is it training for that employer? And I've led like national with different FMSs, national steering committees with employers saying specifically we would like more information around what some of these things mean, like taxes, around workers' comp, around like just practical things that when you're with an agency covers that, but when you're an employer, getting access to that same kind of information so that then they can too pass it on to their employee is critical. So it's really surveying what's most important to this group. And then using that information, of course, to just overall design the overall house. Conducting routine maintenance is number 5. And here we're looking at, from the survey, having a central database is just essential to stay true to overall the design of the floor plan. And once that gets like once you start building a program or the plan is in place, is it effective? Like really looking at collected information that can provide insights to all of us for decision making and then overall program improvement. Um, so pause there because this is a lot. This is a loaded slide with lots of information. Um, Collaborating with partners is next. Solid building comes from just looking at what partnerships can be established with unions, universities, um, other agencies that have really helped pave the way to give support and ongoing support and information to that overall to the employer and the DCW. And then it's seven is designing and customizing. So what with the education and information materials you have what is needed again based on the overall surveying of the landscape, et cetera. What gaps might you have? Um, consider developing the content using different experts in the field. Uh, what already has been built because really training this type of information and assistance doesn't need to cost a lot. There's a lot of materials that already exist out there that with just some attention can be pulled together and then just made available. So the different modalities that Andrea talked about, yeah, can be pulled together and made available overall based on the first couple things we went through, the blueprint, expanding language, and then orientation, um, overall the orientation floor plan. And that certainly, Andrea and I want to put ourselves out there as being so available to support you during um, if this is a goal for your state uh, or you as a FMS provider to just assist with that building the house process. So did we have another poll here?
Yeah, we have one more poll.
Okay.
So it says, what area is of most interest or greatest need for you? Looking at the list Heidi just walked through. We'll see what folks say.
Oh, so we have it kind of, the one that leads us is training the content development, which definitely has uh, I just offered Andrea and I are there together, and I've written a lot, written content for multiple states around the DCW training, especially around the challenging behaviors, which I'm very wedded to and passionate about. Integrated care models are awesome and cost effective. And then we have looks like ties among a lot of the other building the house concepts. So thank you for participating in that. And we did want to leave time, and we have some good time for overall questions. So we were gonna try this by you can raise your hand, um, or overall just put a question if you're in the question and answer where you have that little question box. So whatever you're comfortable doing, you can raise hand now for some questions. Or yeah, go ahead and put it in the question and answer box because I'm sure we haven't answered all of your questions.
Looks like Laura has a question.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can.
Okay, good. Um, you mentioned in the beginning that it's really hard not to use the word training.
Right.
And one of the things that has gotten me in trouble is that we have training for or information and assistance for our employers. We have information assistance for our DCWs. We have information assistance for people in the system, which we have labeled all training. So we say, you must do the training. And people are like, we are doing the training. And I'm like, we don't have evidence of the training, but oh, we're talking about that training, not that training. And so like trying to name everything in a way that keeps
Right.
it clear as to what it is has been a tricky situation. So I don't know if you have stumbled upon a state that figured it all out, or maybe we color coded. I don't know, but
Yeah, I know. I get you. I get you. What state are you from, Laura?
Michigan.
Michigan? Yeah, I mean, it is the whole concept of don't call it training just comes out of the, um, again, if not in regulation, the Medicaid regulation to what's needed for both the employer or the DCW to be eligible to work in the ongoing training they must receive, right? Is to avoid that whole joint employer view. And then also to align with, better align with the philosophy of self direction, which is really going through that employer with control and choice. So you heard us struggle, like I try to use skills, information, assistance, for other kinds of words. But yeah, because it can get lumped into training and then it it's hard to give that a sort, um, into under the training umbrella. But I don't know if other people have input on that too.
Yeah, I mean, you
Thank
could
you.
consider like a toolkit approach as well,
Yeah,
where it's categorized by who's needing the training, and then you sort of group all their education, I'll call it, together, and try to just. I know you said color code it, so that would be sort of similar.
Great.
yeah.
Okay. That's a good idea. Thank you.
Thanks, Laura.
Other questions, or do we have anything written? Nope, not yet. Anybody else with questions on this Halloween Eve? My question was going to be, what's your favorite Halloween candy? But we'll save that for the very end. Any, I don't see anybody else.
So we can just share our contact information too. And so as we said, the slides will be shared eventually. And then this is our email addresses if anybody has any other questions as you let things kind of sink in. I know we've provided a lot of information, and some of it's probably pretty familiar, but others may not. So appreciate everybody's time and joining
Yeah,
today.
yeah, and if you want, yeah, any information and assistance on yeah, how to help build the house, please reach out. We've mentioned we do have different content available, and our partnership uh with Applied Self-Direction goes to we sure rely on them and will continue to with overall yeah, just data gathering. And we may have, did we jump over that slide, Andrea, where we did have an ASD slide of a poll they had done, and maybe some of you participated in what folks would like to see from training. Did we skip that slide? I didn't talk about that slide.
We provided some information about the ASD partnership
Yeah,
with
that,
the
so you'll,
FMSs. Yeah.
yeah, so you'll see that when you get a copy of where people were saying it's valuable if, yeah, if there's a way that caregivers can be paid for their training, that was one value. Like there's some things that from that survey that were definitely worth paying attention to. So,
I
yeah,
just
that
went
right
back to
there.
it, Heidi.
Yep.
We did
Yeah,
skip it.
that one. Yep. Other considerations. So when you get the slide, that this one might be helpful too, just to mull over. Well, we do appreciate your time, and again, yeah, look to further partner with Applied Self-Direction as the surveying entity, because they're so good at it, and then data collection to help us all with in this day and age with this workforce of caregivers. We sure want to support them. And through their employers, support their employers to support them in invaluable ways, and also give them the knowledge and skills they say they need to feel competent in their positions and help with retention. And we know that the challenging behaviors is one of the biggest retention issues when you're working with someone who's has a mental health issue, behavioral health issue, how to support. So thanks everyone for coming, and we hope to hear from you.